For an investigating officer, operational memory is a survival tool. You know the Indian Penal Code by instinct. But that 150-year-old framework is gone, and unlearning a century and a half of entrenched legal precedent is an immediate professional hurdle. New code is significantly leaner. This diagram tracks the total volume of law. On the left, we see the sprawling 511 sections and 23 chapters of the old IPC. On the right, the BNS is consolidated into 358 sections across 20 chapters. This 30% reduction in sections was achieved through strict architectural organization. Provisions that were previously fragmented and scattered across multiple chapters have now been grouped into unified logical blocks. This consolidation is a functional rationalization. By grouping fragmented laws into thematic chapters, the BNS replaces the exhaustive, disjointed lists of the 1860 Code with a framework built for organizational clarity. On the ground, this redesign creates immediate friction. An investigating officer's daily workflow, from drafting FIRs to filing charge sheets, is hardwired to old IPC numbers. That makes this specific index crucial. It functions as a direct translation tool for field officers. Notice the layout in these annexures. They establish a clear side-by-side mapping, allowing investigators to cross-reference memorized IPC sections directly to their BNS counterparts. This mapping reveals a process of structural consolidation. You are not just learning a new number, you are learning where that offense now sits within a much tighter legal hierarchy. Mastering the BNS means understanding why the state moved these crimes to their new locations. It requires adopting the code's new architectural priorities, rather than rote memorization of updated digits. The physical placement of a law dictates its importance to the state. The BNS establishes a new hierarchy of legal priority. Look at how the chapters are stacked. The new code front-loads crimes against women and children, elevating them to Chapter 5, right at the top of the legal structure. Offenses against the state and property are pushed further down the list. Immediately following that is Chapter 6, which centralizes all crimes affecting the human body. The old IPC suffered from severe organizational drift. Incomplete crimes, like attempts, abetments, and criminal conspiracies, were scattered throughout the text. The BNS pulls every incomplete crime into a single, centralized framework within Chapter 4. The code also addresses exploitation directly. Section 69 introduces a specific new offense, criminalizing deceitful sexual intercourse achieved through hidden identities or false promises of marriage. By physically reordering the manual itself, the BNS requires investigators, prosecutors, and judges to address human safety and bodily autonomy as the primary focus. Rebuilding the legal architecture also required the removal of 20 specific IPC provisions that have been entirely taken off the books. On the left, you can see the formal deletion of antiquated colonial statutes and laws already struck down by the Supreme Court. Section 309 for suicide attempts, Section 497 for adultery, and Section 124A for sedition have all been erased. Removing those sections created space on the right for 10 new laws. Section 304, for instance, provides law enforcement with a specific, dedicated charge for snatching. The modernization continues with Section 111, which introduces a unified approach to organized crime, replacing a patchwork of inconsistent state-level laws. Section 113 brings terrorist acts directly into the General Penal Code for the first time, modeling the framework on the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. However, the state built a procedural safeguard into this expansion. Invoking terrorism charges under Section 113 now requires prior approval from an officer at the rank of Superintendent of Police. To support these new charges, the code also establishes a formal legal definition for an organized crime syndicate, recognizing it as a distinct criminal entity. Stripping away antiquated statutes provided the necessary space to introduce the precise legal tools required to address modern criminal networks. Alongside the redefinition of crimes, the state has modernized the baseline penalties. Most notably, financial punishments have been adjusted for decades of inflation. This overview document details the changes. 83 specific offenses have seen their minimum fines increased significantly to match current economic realities. As seen in paragraphs D and E, the manual outlines how these penalty structures interact with the newly consolidated framework of incomplete crimes. But the most severe calibration happens in cases of grievous bodily harm. Under the old IPC, the maximum sentence was capped at 7 years. Under BNS Section 117, subsection 3, this penalty slider now extends from a minimum of 10 years to a maximum of life imprisonment. This escalation is triggered by specific legal conditions, acts that result in a victim suffering permanent disability or being placed into a persistent vegetative state. The code is structurally leaner, but for crimes causing irreversible damage, the state has increased the maximum custodial time from 7 years to a potential life sentence. That brings us to the final addition to the Indian criminal justice framework, the legal mandate of community service. The state is shifting away from a strictly incarcerative approach to reduce the logistical burden on the prison system for minor infractions. However, to prevent judicial overreach, this alternative sentencing is restricted. Community service can only be applied to 6 specific minor offenses. The official manual lists these qualifying crimes clearly. For example, look at subpoints D and E. These allow community service for petty theft, provided full restitution is made to the victim, or for public misconduct by an intoxicated person under Section 355. This requires a shift in charging habits for the investigating officer. He must apply an understanding of these new alternatives rather than defaulting to traditional incarceration, and that is exactly what this structured index is designed to facilitate. For the police force, adopting the BNS means aligning fieldwork with a code that prioritizes human safety and institutional efficiency.